The following is an encore presentation of a pre-recorded program. Chats and evaluations were only available during the live presentation. To join one of CJE Senior Life's many live presentations, please visit cje.net/events, call 773-508-1000, or follow us on your favorite social media platform.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Lisa Andrews. My pronouns are she, her. I am the supervisor of CJE's Linkages program and will be hosting this program today. So first, if you'd like to access closed captions, please click on the CC icon at the bottom of your screen and select either subtitles or transcript for your viewing preference. Please be aware that the program is being recorded today. If you provided an email when you registered, you'll be sent a follow-up email with a link to that. We'll also send you a link to our evaluation survey. Please fill that out after the program. We do value your feedback. And since our programs are recorded, there are higher privacy features in place. So your live participation will be anonymous. You won't be able to see other participants. And when you use the Q&A feature, you can select the option to not share your name. We do encourage you to participate and use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen to ask questions. Please feel free to type in your questions at any time, but we will hold questions until the end. Before we begin, I'm just going to take a quick moment to share information about the Linkages program. So it is a program at CJE Senior Life that provides information to older adults who have adult family members with disabilities. We provide community education programs like today, information and referrals, and a support group. If you're interested in joining our support group, you can call us at 773-508-1327 for more information. And those meetings are scheduled on Zoom the first and third Wednesdays of the month at 10 a.m. So for today's program on special needs trusts, I would like to introduce Tamara Kushner-Groman, who manages CJE's Legal and Benefit Services team. We're so lucky to have Tamara at CJE, and she has been here for 5 years. She's going to give us some context for the conversation and introduce our speaker today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am so glad to see that so many of you have joined this important session. As many of you know, we do have legal services here at CJE. When it comes to certain areas of law, it is very important that a specialist be involved. Think of lawyers like you think of doctors. Sometimes your internist is perfect, but other times you need a specialist. Special needs trusts are definitely specialist territory. Most of you who are here today have an adult child with special needs. Talking about the legal side of things can sometimes feel sterile compared to the love you have for your child. But getting the legal documents together is so important. It is a gift you are giving your child and anyone else involved in the care of your child now or in the future. Transitions are hard, but using a special needs trust can make transitions down the line much smoother. Kathryn C is a specialist in drafting special needs trust and working with families. In fact, I was privileged to sit in on her class recently at a legal conference for Illinois lawyers and have attended several of her other speaking engagements. Ms. Casey's law firm, Dutton Casey and Missolores, is known as a leader in the field of elder law, including special needs trusts. Ms. Casey is a certified elder law attorney and has practiced exclusively in this area since 2004. She has been named a leading lawyer in the field of elder law and a super lawyer in the field. These distinctions that are earned by years of dedicated high-quality work are not given easily. Ms. Casey devotes a substantial portion of her time to helping families plan for the care of a loved one with a chronic care need. She represents her clients with the continuity of care that extends from the creation of a long-term care plan through the execution, implementation, and administration of that plan. Thank you all for being here today, and I will turn it over.
Thank you so much, Tamara, for that wonderful welcome and incredible introduction to the importance and the value of special needs planning and how it is a gift not just to our special needs loved one, but also to the people who will be taking care of our special needs loved one for us. And thank you, Lisa, too, for having me here. Thank you all for attending. I'm going to see if I am technologically advanced enough to share my screen for you today. So give me one moment here and let's see if it works. I think it worked. Okay, I think I'm good to go. Everyone should be able to see my screen. All right, so perfect. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the confirmation. All right, now let's begin talking about special needs trust. And the principal question, what is it? A special needs trust is also called an OBRA trust, a supplemental needs trust, or a pooled trust. So if you hear any of those terms, in general, they are all referring to various types of special needs trusts. They are all different, but they are the same in that they achieve the same purpose. A special needs trust is a legal way for a disabled person to keep all of their assets and still qualify for public benefits like supplemental security income and Medicaid. The funds, all of these assets are held in the special needs trust, and because they're held in a special needs trust, they can't be counted for public benefits purposes. So really, a special needs trust is a legal way to preserve money from the costs of care or residential treatment or medical expenses, rather than having to spend it all down to the normal SSI and Medicaid limits of $17,500. Our Medicaid limit in Illinois now is $17,500. Our SSI limit is still at the $2,000 threshold. So how does this work? Exactly how does a trust work? Essentially, when you create a special needs trust, you are, first and foremost, you are creating a pile of paper. It is a large stack of papers. It's called a trust. And in this trust, we are appointing a trustee to hold and manage assets for another person. And with the special needs trust, we're appointing this trustee to manage the money for our special needs loved one. This trustee can be a trusted friend, it could be a family member, it could be a professional fiduciary, such as a bank, or it could be a nonprofit organization. We use nonprofit organizations when we're creating pooled special needs trusts. So your trustee, this person you're appointing, is holding the money, they're holding the assets, and they're making distributions for the benefit of your special needs loved one for the things that public benefits doesn't pay for. And we're going to go into detail later about what those things are. First, who even qualifies for a special needs trust? You can't just set one up for anybody. They are for special people. So a special needs trust is really for a special needs person. And the way we define a special needs person is a person who is disabled under the law or who is receiving or otherwise eligible to receive public benefits like Medicaid or supplemental security income. So a disabled person could be someone who has a medical condition, a cognitive impairment, a physical injury, something that prevents them from engaging in work on a full-time basis. They might be partly employed, but they can't work full-time. Their condition might be so severe that it limits their ability to manage their own money or handle their own personal affairs. And by public assistance, what we're really talking about is SSI and Medicaid. And SSI, supplemental security income, that's the money you receive from Social Security when you're a disabled person and never had the opportunity to work or never earned enough work credits to qualify for SSDI, or Social Security disability income. And Medicaid is the public benefits program that really funds most of our public benefit systems in Illinois, including residential treatment, medical care, food stamps, public transportation, vocational services are all funded by Medicaid programs. So a special needs trust is for a person with disabilities and allows them to keep all of their public benefits, even though they would otherwise lose them because they've got too much money. So one of the main reasons we do a special needs trust is because we want both the public benefits and we want to keep the money. And the reason is because being a special needs person is often more expensive than being a non-special needs person. Being a special needs person means we're going to incur extraordinary expenses during our lifetime because the world is not adapted to us. We have to adapt to the world. And in doing that, we have to spend more money in order to participate in the world, to get around and to function at the same level as everyone else. So because that costs more money, it's just not right that a special needs person should be allocated to only the $17,500 set aside. That's just not enough money to function. So the special needs trust allows you to have more than $17,500 in assets to pay for your needs and still qualify for the public benefits. And the reason is that the law basically says that if your money is in a special needs trust, Social Security and Medicaid cannot count it as money. Could be $50,000, could be $1 million. Social Security, Medicaid, they have to count it as $0. So we get the best of both worlds. We get the public benefits and we get to keep our assets to pay for our extra needs. There are several different types of special needs trusts, and I'm going to go through them as simply as possible. The two main types are, number one, the first party special needs trust. A first party special needs trust, that is when you are creating a special needs trust for yourself with your own assets. So you are the person with the disability, you are the person with the money, you are creating your own special needs trust for yourself with your own money. That is very different from the other kind of special needs trust, which is what we call a third party funded special needs trust. A third party special needs trust is where you have money and you have a loved one with special needs, and you want to leave money or give money to your loved one with special needs. It might be your child, it might be your spouse, it might be your sister, it might be your partner, it might be your best friend. Whoever this person is, they have the special need, you do not, you're the one with the money, and you want to give it or leave it to them. And so you create what's called a third party special needs trust. You set up the trust, you put your money in it, but the trust is not for you. The trust is for your loved one with special needs. And you can use lots of different ways to make that third party special needs trust. You can do it in a will. You can do it in your own revocable living trust. You can do a standalone irrevocable. There are lots and lots of ways to do it if you're doing it for a loved one. If you're doing it for yourself, we're more limited in how we're able to do it for ourselves. So why would we create a first party special needs trust? The reason we would do a first party special needs trust is because, let's say we're talking about me. I'm going to create my own special needs trust for myself because I am a special needs person. I have a condition that is going to prevent me from working full time for the rest of my life and is going to require extra expenses and needs. And I've got more than the $17,500. I'm going to create this special needs trust for myself because I want to qualify to live in a residential facility, or I want to qualify for SSI or a public benefit, and I don't want to have to spend all my money down to $17,500. So this is a way of me setting it up for myself and protecting my own assets and becoming eligible for public benefits. Maybe I want to do a special needs trust because I'm already on public benefits and Aunt Sally just died. She did not have her legal affairs in order, and she just left me $100,000, which is going to promptly kick me off all of my public benefits and would require a total spend down of those assets as a result. But if I can inherit the money from Aunt Sally and put it into my own special needs trust, I can preserve my public benefits. Maybe I've just been injured in a car accident and I am receiving Medicaid benefits to pay for my injuries, and I'm receiving a lawsuit damage award. I sued the truck driver, whoever it was, and got a lot of money, and I don't want to lose my Medicaid benefits now because I'm going to be permanently injured going forward. I'm going to set up a special needs trust for myself to put that personal injury money into. Maybe I'm just getting older and I'm thinking ahead and I've decided, I've got MS. I know I'm going to need a lot of extra care as I age. And so I want to plan in advance. And I know I'm going to want public benefits in the future. And I know I'm going to run out of money because I only have a limited amount. So maybe I do a special needs trust for myself now to prepare for that future so that I can qualify for public benefits and keep from having to exhaust all my assets. So a first party special needs trust, like we've talked about, is set up for yourself with your own money. And there are two ways of doing that. One is through what we call the D4A, and one is what we call the D4C. And both of those trusts are first party special needs trusts, and the primary purposes of them are that we're putting our own money into that trust. The trust funds are only for our own benefit. So my money goes in, it can only be used for me. It has to include a payback provision to the state of Illinois. So my money goes into my trust, but then when I die, the remaining money has to go back to the state of Illinois to repay the state of Illinois for the benefits that I received from the state of Illinois. It's a payback provision. You do not find payback provisions in third-party special needs trusts ever, or you at least shouldn't if the person knows what they're doing in the document. Payback provisions are only in first-party trusts. We have to purchase our prepaid funeral and burial before we put our money in the trust, because once the money's in, we can't pay for it after that fact. And there are problems in whether we can set up a first-party special needs trust after the age of 65, which is one of the reasons I mentioned some people do these in advance of 65 because it's easier to do them in advance of 65. So basically federal, I'm not going to go through all of this. We'll leave all this legalese aside, but basically federal and state law allow us to set up a D4A special needs trust where we can name a friend, a family member, or a bank as our trustee. Lots of freedom in choosing your trustee when you do a D4A. The D4C is more limited, but it's a wonderful, wonderful alternative to the D4A when we don't have a trusted friend or family member, or we don't want to involve a bank, because the D4C, which is also called the pooled trust, you've probably heard that out there, a pooled trust. Pooled trusts are run by non-for-profit organizations, and they're wonderful, wonderful organizations that act as trustee of special needs trusts. And so they're experienced in handling special needs trusts. They're experienced in working with people with special needs. They know how to manage the money. They know how to make the distributions, and they're non-for-profits, so they have a charitable mission, and they're a great resource if you want a level of professionalism and expertise in managing your special needs trusts. So the D4C is the pool trust. And again, it's a wonderful, wonderful option where the non-for-profit manages your money and manages your trust for you. So the payback provision, just to review again, the most important difference between a first-party special needs trust and a third-party special needs trust is that the first-party special needs trust requires payback to the state of Illinois. The third-party special needs trust does not require payback. So it's only when you're setting up a trust with your own money for yourself that we have to pay back the state of Illinois after we die. And we're only paying back the state the amount of money that the state paid for us. So it was $50, they get 50. It was 500,000, they get 500,000 if that much money is in the trust. They never get more than whatever remains in the special needs trust. A lot of times the state doesn't get anything back at all because the special needs trust is exhausted during your lifetime. You are allowed to pay for some things before payback happens to the state. So after you pass away, your trustee is allowed to pay taxes and the costs of administering the trust before the state gets paid back. But the trustee is not allowed to pay for your funeral before the state gets paid back. And so this is why I am out there all the time lecturing people on how you have got to set up your own prepaid funeral and burial before you put your money into your special needs trust. Because with the first party special needs trust, you cannot pay for the funeral until the state's been paid back. So that's a major problem with first party special needs trusts. Take a breath, take a pause to absorb all of that as we move into third party special needs trusts. I do a lot of third party special needs trusts because a lot of my clients are parents or spouses to loved ones with a special need. So they have a spouse who has a special need, they have a child with a special need. I have a lot of clients who have both a spouse and a child with special needs. And so what they are looking to do is create a third party special needs trust, which is where you have money, you have a loved one with special needs, and you want to leave or give your money to your loved one through a special needs trust. So it's a third party special needs trust because you're giving your money to somebody else in this special needs trust. Why would we do this? Principally, we do this because we don't want our special needs loved one to inherit money from us in a way that would cause them to lose their public benefits. We don't want them to lose the public benefits, and we don't want to have to disinherit them. So a lot of lawyers I've seen will say, well, if you've got a special needs child, you need to disinherit them. You can't leave them anything. And this is absolutely the wrong thing to do, because a person with special needs is actually going to need probably more money than your children without special needs. So often my clients will leave everything to their special needs child and disinherit their non-special needs children, or they'll leave more to that special needs child. And again, the reasoning is that when you're a person living with special needs, your expenses tend to be higher than when you're living without a special need. So we don't want to disinherit our special needs child. In fact, we want to leave them something that allows them to be taken care of and allows for the payment of other people who are going to kind of replace us as parents. One of my clients' biggest concerns is if I'm parenting an adult child with special needs and I pass away, who's going to care for my child? Who's going to step into my shoes? And having a special needs trust preserves money to replace us as the parent, to pay for things that will make that special needs child's life easier. So we don't want to disinherit our special needs child. We don't want to leave them money in a way that makes them lose their public benefits. And we don't want their care plan to be disrupted. You know, we want to be able to replace ourselves as parent. We want to be able to hire someone to step in for us. We want their care plan to be continuous. We don't want the trauma. The trauma of losing a parent is bad enough without the trauma of losing a placement or the continuity of a care plan. We might choose a special needs trust for a child of ours with very minor special needs, who's otherwise really functional, working part-time, maybe even full-time, but they're really not good at managing money. And we know they're going to have extra needs as they age. And so we want their inheritance to go into a special needs trust, really to make sure that somebody else is managing it for them and to make sure it's preserved for the duration, for the rest of their lives. And another reason is you want to make sure your special needs loved one has enough money throughout their lifetime to pay for the things that you had been providing them with while you were alive. So maybe you were picking up groceries regularly, maybe you were buying all the clothes, maybe you're taking them on vacations, and you're providing all of this lifestyle funding for them to improve their lives, paying for their therapy, maybe paying for a medication that isn't covered by Medicare or Medicaid. And if you're gone, no one's going to be able to step in to pay for those things. So you want money set aside for them to make sure that those things continue to be paid for. So the third party special needs trust is, again, just to distinguish it from the first party special needs trust. This is when you have the money and you want to leave the money to another person who has special needs and is either receiving SSI and Medicaid or should be receiving SSI or Medicaid. So it's you leaving it to a child, you leaving it to a friend, you leaving the money to a spouse. It could be a grandparent doing it for a grandchild. It's anytime one person has the money and is leaving it in a special needs trust to another person. There is no limit to the size of this trust. So you could decide, I've had clients decide I'm going to leave, $20,000 to a special needs trust for my loved one. I've had clients say I'm leaving $4 million to a special needs trust for my loved one. It totally depends on how much money you want to commit to that trust, how much you can afford to commit, and how many other people you need to share that money with, and how much you think your special needs loved one needs to support themselves on top of their public benefits throughout their lifetime. There's also no age limit on this trust. So whereas with the first party special needs trust, you've got this problem with being over 65, which makes it really hard to do if you're over 65. With a third party special needs trust, you could be 1 year old, you could be 100 years old. There is no age limit. You can leave a third party special needs trust to anybody regardless of age. And the funds in the third party special needs trust can be used for virtually anything that benefits your loved one. The really special thing about the third party special needs trust is when you're leaving your money to a special needs person, there is no payback, none. There is absolutely no payback to the state. The state is not entitled to anything remaining in that trust. So you have the power to say, I'm leaving all my money to my special needs child. But if my special needs child passes away before all of the funds are exhausted, then the remaining money goes to all my other children who are not special needs. Or it goes to this wonderful charity who I'd like to benefit. You get to decide who it goes next to. It is not going to the state of Illinois because there are no payback provisions with a third-party special needs trust. How do we do it? You have to have a lawyer. You need to be very, very careful. Like Tamara said, this is actually a very esoteric area of law. It really does require you to hire someone who has experience in special needs planning. You can go to the Special Needs Alliance is an organization. You can see what lawyers participate in that alliance. You can go to the Academy of Special Needs Planners to find a lawyer. Look for a lawyer who does this routinely so that it's done correctly. You need to have a trust document. So it can be done in your own trust. You can have a revocable living trust that includes a special needs trust for your loved one. You can do it in a will. Your will can say, I'm leaving everything to a special needs trust for my loved one. And in fact, if you're doing one for your spouse, you have to do it in a will, which is a little known rule, but I can't even explain that rule. I'm not even going to try. I have no idea why they came up with that one. But basically, you cannot do a special needs trust for a spouse unless it's in your will. You can also do a sole benefit trust where you are setting up a standalone trust, which is a separate special needs trust document from your own revocable living trust document. Lots of ways to do it. Get advice from your lawyer on the best way to do it. You can also do an ABLE account as an alternative. So, sometimes the costs of doing a special needs trust outweigh the benefit. And the ABLE account does allow us, and the amount goes up every year, but you are allowed to contribute $17,000 per year as of this year to an ABLE account, provided that your loved one's disability came about before they turned 26. Allegedly, this age is going to change such that we'll have the ability to do the funding as long as the onset happened before the age of 46. So that's pending and effective in the future. So for now, if the onset of disability was before the age of 26, we can put 17,000 into an ABLE account. ABLE accounts work just like special needs trusts, but you don't need a lawyer for them. You just need to go to a bank and set one up. And basically what you're doing is you're putting money into a special needs trust-like account that is not countable by Medicaid. So wonderful, wonderful alternative if we're talking about small amounts of money going into a special needs trust. You can contribute the $17,000 a year to the ABLE account. It can only hold up to $100,000 total without impacting SSI or Medicaid. Let's talk about some special needs trust administration issues, because one thing you have to consider when you're setting up a special needs trust, whether you're doing it for yourself, the first party, or whether you're doing the third party for another person, is how is this thing going to work? How does a trust work? And trusts really are, when you come down to it, it's a stack of paper and it's a bank account. That's basically what a trust is. We have a stack of paper that has words written on it that control how the trust works. And then we've got a bank account which holds the money. So our trustee is the person in charge of doing this banking and holding our trust document. And they need to go to the bank and they need to set up a bank account that says something like the Lisa Simpson Self-Settled Special Needs Trust, dated April 1st, 2021. That's an example of how we set up a first-party special needs trust bank account. A third-party special needs bank account would be called something like the Lisa Simpson Supplemental Needs Trust under the Marge Simpson Revocable Living Trust, dated March 15th, 2022. So that's where you're Marge and you've done your own revocable living trust and you've set up a special needs trust for your daughter, Lisa, under your own trust. So really it's just banking. We need an EIN number. Your lawyer will help you get an EIN number, which is the tax ID number for the bank account. And you will go to the bank with that EIN number and the trustee will use that EIN number to open the bank account. Let's say you've named Bart, your son Bart, as the trustee of the special needs trust for your daughter Lisa, and it will be titled the Bart Simpson as trustee of the Lisa Simpson Supplemental Needs Trust. It's really just banking. Don't forget the prepaid funeral and burial. I just cannot emphasize this enough. Again, if we're setting up our own special needs trust for ourselves, we've got to pay for it first. And we need to tell Medicaid and SSI what we're doing. So if we're setting up a special needs trust and we're opening the bank account, we got to tell public benefits. We got to tell them. If we're not opening a bank account yet, we're not putting any money in it until maybe we die. A lot of people don't put money into their special needs trust until after they're gone. Then we don't need to tell public benefits until we're gone and the bank account gets open. But really, it's when that bank account gets open, that's when we need to tell public benefits. We have some serious considerations about who our trustee is going to be. So I have found in all these years of creating and administering special needs trust that it's hard for people to do. People have a lot going on in their lives. They're juggling a lot of balls. And taking care of a person with special needs on its own, can be overwhelming. So while our trustee isn't obligated to care for our special needs loved one. They don't have to provide them, they don't have to bring them into their house or provide them with 24/7 care. They do need to pay for those things. So they do need to arrange for that stuff. They need to figure out, like, where is the person with special needs going to live? How are they going to be cared for? What bills need to be paid? So your trustee does have a lot of responsibility and work to do in terms of making sure your special needs loved one has a care plan and has a place to live, and the bills are getting paid, and the money is safe and protected, and public benefits sources are flowing properly. And that can be really overwhelming and complicated. So we want to be really careful about who we choose as our trustee. We want somebody who has a certain level of sophistication and familiarity with banking and financial management. I think we can all agree we've got lots of people in our lives who are not good at either of those things. People do not learn that stuff in high school. People go through life without a lot of financial acumen. It can be hard to find somebody who's good with financials. So we want to look at the people in our lives and say, who's good with money, who's good with financials, and then who's got the time to do this? Who's got the time and the proper personality? Who's trustworthy? Who's loyal? Who's dependable? And if we have someone in our lives who can take on that responsibility, wonderful. If we can't, then we really want to seriously consider a professional fiduciary like a bank, like a geriatric care manager agency. A lot of them provide special needs trust administration services. They act as both care managers and trustees. Or we want to consider a pooled trust with a non-for-profit, where we've got a group of committed, charitable-minded individuals managing accounts for lots of special needs people. We also want to be careful when we were choosing our trustee not to put people in potentially negative relationships. So we might have one child with special needs and another child who doesn't. And it might seem to make a lot of sense to appoint our non-special needs child as trustee, but there might be resentment between those two children as siblings, because one has special needs and one does not. Your non-special needs child might resent the responsibility of having to act as trustee. The child with special needs might resent that their sibling is now in charge of their lives. So you can disrupt an otherwise healthy and really functional relationship by introducing this trustee beneficiary relationship. So we want to be really careful about that, because there is a great deal of virtue in preserving family relationships that are special, like the sibling relationship or the parent-child relationship. Same goes when we're doing a special needs trust for our spouse. Are we disrupting a relationship by appointing a child as trustee for that spouse? So give those some consideration too when you're choosing your trustee. I can't overemphasize enough the importance of using care managers in the use of special needs trusts, because your trustee is going to have all of this work to do, but not necessarily all of the expertise they need to do the job. So they might be good at financials, but do they really understand autism? Do they really understand what it's like to be living in an intermediate care facility? Do they know what it's like to go through a psychiatric hospitalization? Have they fully appreciated the pain and the hardship in having to navigate health insurance benefits and insurance claims and medical billing and medical scheduling? All of these things are really, really challenging and getting more challenging every day. So using the services of a professional care manager, this is somebody who your trustee hires. So your trustee, who's responsible for managing this money for your special needs loved one, has the power to use that money to pay a care manager to do a lot of the heavy lifting. And a care manager is somebody who has expertise, usually a licensed clinical social worker or a registered nurse. They've got expertise in these problems, and they can visit on a regular basis, which is great if your trustee's out of town. They can monitor the placement, monitor the care being provided, monitor the resources, stay up to date on the public benefits options, and they can come to the trustee and say, you know, your special needs beneficiary could really use, you know, this, that, or the other thing. Like, let's get them a bus pass. Let's get them signed up for classes at the Art Institute. Let's do this, that, or the other thing to make their lives better. And they can really provide guidance to the trustee on how to use the money in a way that benefits the beneficiary. You can also appoint a trust protector if you're worried that your trustee isn't going to do a good job or that they're going to be overwhelmed. If you're worried that your beneficiary, your special needs loved one, isn't going to be able to advocate for themselves and say, I need money for this, that, or the other thing, you can appoint a person to act as a trust protector. And basically, the trust protector has certain powers that you would want to use if you were still around. And you won't be. You'll be gone at this point if you're doing it for someone you love after you've passed away. That person, your trust protector, would be able to get rid of a bad trustee, like get rid of that one. They'd be able to appoint a new one. They'd be able to modify the trust if it's got problems and it's suddenly not compliant with SSI or Medicaid regulations. And it can review accountings and just generally make sure that things are running appropriately. Talking about distributions, I want to kind of go through this list because it's easy for me to sit here and say that a special needs trust, the money in the special needs trust can be used for virtually anything that public benefits doesn't pay for. But what is that really? Let's use our imagination. Money in a special needs trust can be used for recreational equipment, games, and crafts. A telephone answering machine, a television, radio, cable service, computers, iPads, stereo equipment, an automobile, musical instruments. It can pay for a home for your loved one to live in, tools and all the repairs involved in maintaining a home, audio video equipment, cell phones. You can use it to pay the difference between a private and a semi-private room in an institution. You can use it for household goods, wheelchairs, walkers, canes, any kind of medical adaptive equipment, exosomes, exoskeletons, leg braces, durable medical equipment, cleaning supplies, personal supplies, any kind of recreation, entertainment, trip to Disneyland, airline tickets, medical insurance, travel and education expenses, newspaper or magazine subscriptions, paying for taxes, furniture, paying for a care manager, going on vacation, school tuition, educational programs, movies, alarm systems on the house, health and life insurance premiums, medical treatment that isn't covered by public benefits. They're unfortunately, lots of stuff is not covered. Dental care, physical therapy, massages, still lots of stuff that isn't necessarily covered by our regular health insurance or Medicaid or Medicare even. And home care services. Let's not forget that the major gap in our country's long-term care plan is custodial care. Our insurance, other than long-term care insurance, it's not paying for companion care or custodial care at home or in any other setting, and that can be paid for out of a special needs trust. So there are only some distributions that would affect SSI negatively, and that is shelter-related expenses and food. So if the special needs trust pays for shelter or food, we are going to get a 1/3 reduction in our SSI benefits, which can be a problem, but sometimes it's worth it. Might be worth it to take that 1/3 reduction for the value of the shelter and food expenses. And cardinal rule of special needs trusts, and this is a kicker, is the money in the special needs trust can never be given directly to the beneficiary as cash. The beneficiary of the special needs trust will always get to keep their SSI or SSDI payment. or Social Security retirement payment, whatever that is. They get to keep that as their cash, but they can never have cash from the trust. The trust has to pay the bills of the beneficiary directly to the third-party bill payer, not through the beneficiary. So that's an important limitation to keep in mind. The trustee cannot just turn cash over to the beneficiary. We are allowed to use a special needs trust to pay for family members and non-family members to act as caregivers, and we can pay for their travel and lodging if that's necessary to take the beneficiary to Disneyland or take them on vacation or take them to see family members. We can also use true link cards in the special needs trust. So this gets around the rule of, well, we can't give our beneficiary cash, right? But maybe the trustee thinks, I've got a beneficiary and they're going to Disneyland or they're just, going to the Art Institute every weekend for classes and they need cash money, right? They need money just to be out and about. How do we do this? So the trustee can get a TrueLink card online. It's called the TrueLink Visa card. And basically the trustee sets it up and preloads the card with money. So you can preset the amount and you can also preset how the money can be used. So you can make sure that it is not allowed to be used at casinos or liquor stores. You can make sure it never goes above $100 a week or whatnot. And you give that TrueLink Visa card to the beneficiary, and that beneficiary basically has a workable credit card that they can use going around town to free spend. And it gives them some autonomy, it gives them a sense of independence while also providing some control and supervision as to how that money is being spent. So an absolutely wonderful way of getting around this rule that cash from the trust can't be given directly to the beneficiary. And with that, I think I have left approximately 15 minutes to take your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kathryn. I feel like I learned so much. We don't have a ton of questions, so Tamara and I have some. I thought of some along the way, but we do encourage people to type in any questions that they have. One that we did get is somebody asks that my son has a first person and a third person trust. Does an ABLE account have any advantages over a special needs trust?
Yes. So one of the things I want to point out, and this is such an apt question, is a lot of special needs people have both the first party and the third party special needs trusts. And it is so important to keep them separate because they are treated totally differently. They need totally different bank accounts. They need to be treated totally differently. And it can be really confusing to make sure that they don't get intermingled. The special needs trust is once it's set up, it's super easy to use and it has all the same advantages of an ABLE account. The reason we would prefer an ABLE account over a special needs trust is because we're trying to avoid getting a lawyer involved in the first place. So if we already have a first party and a third party special needs trust set up, there really isn't any good reason to set up an ABLE account. We would use the TrueLink card instead to get cash to our beneficiary through either one of those vehicles. And we would probably want to use the first party special needs trust first before tapping into the third party special needs trust. Because remember, the first party special needs trust, if it's not totally spent down, is going to have to go back to the state of Illinois at death. So we usually use those funds first. But the ABLE account isn't really going to add anything to a situation where we already have a first and a third party special needs trust because we can use that TrueLink card. The ABLE account is preferable in situations where we don't want to hire a lawyer. We don't want the fuss of having a lawyer involved, having a formal trust document involved, and having the maintenance and administration of a trust involved. And this ABLE account is never going to be funded with more than $17,000 a year and up to $100,000 total. So really an ABLE account is a cost-effective way of managing smaller amounts of money in a system where you don't have to go through legal services, you don't have to go through a trust document, and you don't have to go through all of the trust administrative proceedings involved in a formal special needs trust administration. You are doing the ABLE account entirely through the bank. So I love it for that reason as an alternative. The only objection I've ever had to the use of the ABLE is with clients who are concerned that their special needs loved one isn't going to spend the money appropriately. So do keep in mind when you are setting up an ABLE account as an alternative to a formal special needs trust, your special needs loved one has total access to that account. So you can't limit how much they can spend at a time, how much they can take out, or what they can use it for. So now, while that provides lots of freedom and autonomy and independence to your special needs loved one, it's not appropriate for everyone. So if you want the oversight, if you want the supervision involved, you are better off not doing the ABLE account and instead doing the formal special needs trust, where you can control their spending through the TrueLink card.
Great. That's a great answer. We have had a couple more questions come in. So I hope these aren't going to get too into the weeds, but so one person asked, can a special needs person's 401k money be used or be added to a third person special needs trust?
Oh, that's such a great question. Oh, and it's so complicated. Let me put this very simply. If you are doing a first party special needs trust, if you want to set up a special needs trust with your own money and your own IRA or 401k, you cannot do it without taking a taxable distribution from your retirement account. It's so sad. I wish there were a way around it. There is not. First party special needs trusts funded with IRAs or 401ks will have a tax hit. If you are setting up a third party special needs trust for another person, then you can name that trust as a beneficiary on your 401k or IRA, and there will be no tax consequence. In fact, there is a tax advantage because under the Secure Act, disabled people are allowed to inherit a retirement account without tax consequence and are not subject to a 10-year withdrawal. They are allowed to stretch out their withdrawals over their life expectancy. So if you are leaving your 401k or IRA to a third-party special needs trust, there's not going to be a negative tax consequence. If you accidentally leave your 401k or IRA to a special needs person without the trust, let's say you name your special needs child as a direct beneficiary in your IRA, if your special needs child gets to a lawyer quickly after you pass away and gets a special needs trust set up immediately, they can avoid the tax consequence. But they have to do it immediately. So it's not ideal in my mind. It's not ideal in my mind. It's preferable to have the special needs trust set up first and you name it as a beneficiary on your 401k or IRA, and you will have no tax consequence and you will save your special needs loved one the pain of having to hire a lawyer and deal with that problem after you're gone.
I'm going to jump in with two brief questions that I get all the time.
Yeah.
One question is, if I create a third-party special needs trust for my child, can other people, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, contribute to it?
Yes. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. Absolutely. So a lot of times what we'll do is one special needs trust, one third-party special needs trust. Now, Tamara, it does have to be a standalone trust. It can't be under your revocable living trust. It needs to be a separate standalone trust. But we'll do one, and we will then invite all the other family members to contribute to that, whether during their lifetime, they could make a lifetime donation to it, or they could simply leave a gift to it upon their death in their own will or trust, as long as they name it correctly. So we'll provide instructions. As long as they have the correct name and date of the trust, anyone in the family can leave money to that trust. And that's a very neat way of making sure we don't have, 10 different special needs trusts in a family. We just have one that everybody is contributing to.
Thank you. And the other question I get all the time is, what are pros and cons of having my trustee in state versus out of state? Like, are there any legal considerations there?
No, there aren't. It's really rare for me to have an in-state trustee, honestly, anymore. Everybody is so far flung. People are all over the place. So I don't see any negatives to having a trustee that's not geographically close. Everything can be done remotely. Banking, financial, it can all be done remotely. It is easier if you are at least in the country. It is harder if you are outside of the country, but as long as you're in the country, it's very easy to manage these things remotely. And my recommendation is, anytime you've got an out-of-state anybody, you need to have somebody with boots on the ground locally, and that's usually your care manager. So you need to have a social worker or care manager who is local, just because we do want some person-to-person contact with our beneficiary. But for trustee purposes, this person really could be anywhere.
Thank you.
Okay, we've had a couple more questions come in. So somebody is asking, does a third-party trust apply to someone who's not receiving benefits currently, but has a history of mental illness and hospitalizations?
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of clients with children who just have problems, just regular routine problems. And they're not necessarily disabled under Social Security law. They're not currently receiving benefits, but we know that as that child ages, they're going to encounter increasing challenges because their aging issues are going to compound their otherwise regular problems. And we want a special needs trust for them, because we just never want them managing the money. We always want them to have the potential to receive public benefits in the future. So we'll do a third-party special needs trust, just because we know we want the best of both worlds. We want to preserve the funds and the possibility of future public benefits.
And someone is asking if they can see the list of eligible distributions again, just to kind of get
Yeah,
a better sense of it, because it's
there's so many.
yeah. So you could just keep that slide up. Someone's asking, what is the average cost of creating a third-person trust? Can you give a ballpark?
It's really hard. I recommend that you talk to a lawyer, because it's going to depend on the complexity of the situation and the type of assets involved. It's not, unfortunately, the amount of money you have. So sometimes it's actually more expensive the less money you have than the more money you have. Because of the nature of the assets that we're trying to get into the special needs trust. So meet with a lawyer, discuss the kind of assets involved, the kind of trust you decide to do, and your options about the various types. Some are less expensive than others, and get a ballpark range before you then commit to the work on that plan.
Makes sense. And can someone set up both a third-party special needs trust and an ABLE account? You said that you can have both.
You absolutely can have both. Yes, absolutely.
Great. This one's a little bit more in depth, maybe is the last one we have time for. So someone's saying, I have a client that enjoys the autonomy of having access to their money. We're considering switching that trust to a special needs trust, so they'll be able to access Medicaid. Can money from a special needs trust be moved to an ABLE account rather than using TrueLink?
I don't know, because the jury is out on that one. So, there's a lot of debate about whether that's the case. I would strongly, if we're doing a first party self-settled special needs trust, I would recommend against it. If we're doing a third party special needs trust, I would be a little bit more comfortable with it. The problem here is that an ABLE account, like I mentioned before, remember, the beneficiary is total access, right? Total access. So there's the possibility they can go in and take the money and use it for somebody else, not just themselves. And that violates the sole benefit rule of special needs trusts and public benefits. So public benefits could say, if you're taking money out of a special needs trust and putting it into an ABLE account, you're violating the sole benefit rule. This is not a special needs trust. The money is available, we can count it, and you're going to lose your public benefits eligibility. So I would consider a couple things. One, maybe set up an ABLE with the disabled person's own money before you set up their first party special needs trust, so that it's already done. The money isn't coming out of the special needs trust, it's set up before the special needs trust is already established. They get their $17,000 in their ABLE account, we call that a day. You put the rest of their money in their first party special needs trust, and that money never gets pushed over into the ABLE. So they're two totally different things. So kind of the best of both worlds. But again, you're not taking money out of the special needs trust and putting it into the ABLE account. If the ABLE account at $17,000 isn't enough to make them happy, then let's get them a TrueLink card. And let's make the TrueLink card substantial, because there aren't limits on how much you can put on the TrueLink card. You can put whatever you want on there and they can spend freely. So it will not violate the sole benefit rule, the TrueLink card. So it's just a safer way of handling it.
Well, thank you so much for all of this information, and thank you everyone for attending. As we leave the webinar today, the evaluation will pop up. Please do take the time to complete it and know if it, so we know if it was useful to you and any ideas that you have about future programming. This is actually the second in our series of programs about special needs trusts. And so if you're unable to complete the evaluation today, we'll send a reminder link via email. We'll also send a link to the recording, as well as our YouTube page where other Linkages programs can be found. And if anybody has further questions, where should they direct them?
Oh gosh, please have them call our office at 312-899-0950, and we will get you to the right person.
And Katie, I believe you sometimes see, and as you can see on the bottom of the screen, there are offices in several different locations, not just Chicago.
Yes.
So I know we have a lot of folks who are hesitant to contact someone who's only in the city. So I just wanted to point out that there are several locations available.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And we hope to see you at our next program in February. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye.